InvestorIdeas.com podcasts.
Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of InvestorIdeas.com podcasts. In today's podcast, we'll be looking at a few public company announcements as well as going back over our few years of podcasting as this is our 500th episode. So we'll be looking at announcements from High Tide Incorporated, trading on the TSX Venture as HITI and the OTCQB as HITIF, as well as Aurora Cannabis Incorporated, trading on the New York Stock Exchange and TSX as ACB. Neptune Wellness Solutions Incorporated, trading on the NASDAQ and the TSX as NEPT, as well as Village Farms International Incorporated, trading on the NASDAQ and the TSX as VFF. So first today, looking at High Tide Incorporated, a retail-focused cannabis corporation enhanced by the manufacturing and distribution of consumption accessories, who announced that its wholly owned subsidiary Valiant Distribution Canada has signed a trademark license agreement with JW Home Goods LLC to use the Jane West and JW trademarks for the term of 2 years. Now, Jane West is a high-profile American cannabis activist, influencer, and founder of her global lifestyle brand. The Jane West license grants Valiant the right to manufacture, promote, advertise, distribute, and sell certain types of consumption accessories in Canada, the US, the UK, and in the European Union. Now, the royalty-based merchandising agreement includes the production of vaporizers, glass filtration devices, grinders, and rolling trays, among other items. We're excited to launch Jane West branded products into the international legal smoke shop market as soon as possible, following the success of her established glassware line that's been widely distributed across North America, said Andy Palalis, Chief Revenue Officer to High Tide. Now, as the founder of Women Grow, creator of her popular glassware line, and developer of a rapidly growing set of packaging partnerships, Jane is a visionary, and we will be privileged to work alongside her to develop her next line of consumption accessories, added Mr. Palalis. Now, under the wholesale business segment, High Tide expects to design and distribute these new products as part of the established Famous Brands line of consumption accessories, which currently includes the brands of Snoop Dogg Pounds, Cheech and Chong's Up in Smoke, Trailer Park Boys, Jay and Silent Bob, Guns N' Roses, and more. So, High Tide getting Jane West under their branding. I do like what they've been focusing on, which is using a lot of these cannabis activists as well as sort of cannabis cultural icons such as Snoop Dogg, Jay and Silent Bob, Cheech and Chong, etc., to build out their accessories brands. Within the accessories market today, it's still kind of a wild west when it comes to actually having the rights to use on a lot of these accessories. There's still a shit ton of accessory companies that are out there that are producing tons of products with basically unbranded and unlicensed images and sort of branding ideas. And that is starting to get cleaned up a little bit. I think that now that this industry is becoming a little bit more legalized, especially within the states, now that you're seeing more states become active, and there is talk about some sort of federal changes within the next year or so, I think you're going to start to see a lot more of importance surrounding certain brands for accessories within that market, and hopefully we'll start to see a little bit less of the knockoff brands that we've seen within that space so far. This is similar if you've ever paid attention to Cheech Glass specifically. So they were a North American-based company that just started making glass without Cheech's consent whatsoever, and it wasn't until about maybe 2 or 3 years into their production that eventually he found out and sued them, and then obviously got his own percentage of that. So they're kind of the main example that I would use when you're looking at what's gone on in the cannabis accessories market so far and then how that is changing. And companies like High Tide, who are focusing on building out this brand and collecting all of these high profile celebrities as well as, again, activists within the cannabis community, are making a really smart play. As again, within the next few years, you're going to start to see that more people will be trying to enter this space. And obviously, if you've already had success with a lot of these previous brand partners, that puts you in a better angle than it is going to be for other newer glass brands or newer accessories companies to sort of get these people to jump on board and use their branding rights for their products. Next, looking at Aurora Cannabis Incorporated, who announced today that it's entered into a strategic supply agreement with Cantech Holdings, one of Israel's leaders in the medical cannabis field. Now, under the terms of the agreement, Aurora will supply Cantech with dried bulk flower over a 2-year period with the option to extend. And the company intends to provide Cantech with a minimum of 4,000 kilograms of bulk dried flower annually, which will be processed into finished product and co-branded under the Aurora and Cantech brand names for the Israel market, for the potential for additional international market sales. Now, having secured all necessary export and import permits, the initial shipment of cannabis under the agreement occurred during the week of November 16th. We're excited about our strategic relationship with Cantech, a leader in the Israeli market. And this agreement provides Aurora with a great opportunity to expand our medical cannabis brand and industry-leading science in one of our key international markets of focus, said Miguel Martin, the Chief Executive Officer of Aurora. Now, today's announcement demonstrates more than just a supply agreement. It's about the strength and quality of the Aurora medical cannabis brand being validated once again by the world's medical cannabis markets, including countries like Israel, in which we had no distribution prior to today. We consider this agreement to be a significant step for Aurora, and we look forward to bringing our high-quality medical cannabis products to patients in Israel. Now, Cantek is one of the leading medical cannabis enterprises in Israel with a foothold across the entire value chain of the medical cannabis industry in Israel. Cantek holds strategic partnerships with prominent drugstore chains, distribution companies, clinics, and is deeply involved with Israel's growing medical cannabis patient community. And Aurora is now strategically positioned in two of the largest legal medical cannabis markets outside of Canada, Germany, and now Israel, and one of the largest importers of medical cannabis in the world. And the company plans to continue to leverage its market leadership as it further develops its medical cannabis markets internationally into key markets. So Aurora Cannabis, again, they've been focused on international supply chains and the medical market specifically since kind of their early inception. Now that's really starting to pay off for them. So they have a good foothold in Germany, now establishing a good foothold in Israel. I would expect to see more momentum for them over the next 2 years within the European Union. And I do know that they have been looking a little bit, and again, I don't think it's a huge expectation, but there's a few companies that have been looking at, obviously, the Asian Pacific market, and I would expect at some point, if there are medical programs within those markets that get opened up, that Aurora will probably be one of the first companies to enter into that space, or will at least be one of the first vying for position within that space. But at least as far as international companies go, Aurora Cannabis is definitely building out a nice hub and sort of distribution model, in that they're going to have key sort of sectors for the global cannabis industry. And again, I've talked a lot about this in the past with companies like Chiron Life Sciences and a few others coming out of Israel as well. But I do believe that there's a few companies that are playing the longer game, which is the global cannabis market, as opposed to really focusing on their localized markets. Obviously, the Canadian market is still one of the biggest legal markets that's out there. But for right now, when you're looking at the overall competition in that market, and especially for just dried bulk flower, it's pretty difficult to make really high profit margins, and it's pretty difficult to be that successful as there's so many people vying for position. And so I do think that Aurora is definitely positioning themselves well for when this industry does go global. Looking next at Neptune Wellness Solutions, who announced today that secured its first purchase orders of its own in-house developed cannabis brand, Mood Ring products, to the British Columbia Liquor Distribution Branch, the wholesaler and public retailer of non-medical cannabis throughout the province. Now, Neptune's Mood Ring products, namely high CBD oil and high CBD capsules, will be available to purchase in December through the BC Cannabis Store online, in addition to its 24 government-run retail locations across BC. Now, additionally, the Mood Ring product line will be available to the 295 private licensed retailers in BC, and the products are manufactured at the company's purpose-built facility in Sherbrooke, Quebec. And Neptune's other Mood Ring products, namely Classic Hashish and Legacy Hashish, use the company's newly implemented and proprietary solventless extraction for THC concentrates. In Canada, Neptune anticipates further purchase orders imminently following the signing of a supply agreement with Ontario Cannabis Store and the wholesaler and sole online retailer of recreational cannabis in Ontario for the sale and distribution of Mood Ring. And the company is now working with additional provincial boards to register products and increase the distribution capabilities for Mood Ring, said Mr. Karamata. Now, Neptune has secured access to a footprint for Mood Ring totaling 567 retail stores across 2 Canadian provinces, with the opportunity to scale to additional retailers in additional provinces upon securing supply agreements. Now, Dr. Tony Renaud, Neptune's Chief Financial Officer and Global Operating Officer, added, "Our strategic decision to focus on the innovation of health and wellness and the super ingredients that are the cannabinoids is based on our belief that we are standing at the edge of a plant-based transformation, driven as a result of changing consumer demand. When we look at the global market, the overall acceptance of cannabis is high across generations, with 40-plus countries exploring a legal cannabis framework. What's more, estimates suggest the global market opportunity could be in excess of $250 billion within 15 years. Now, what separates Neptune from its competitors is our mission to bring cannabis to the world to harness its wide range of applications for the use in antifungal, antibacterial, and moisturizing products. And Neptune is committed to innovation, and we plan to integrate cannabinoids into products from toothpaste to deodorants, hand sanitizers, and other everyday household usage products. And it starts with our business in Canada, followed with the expansion into the US and other countries. And this is part of Neptune's commitment to deliver shareholder value and to redefine the cannabis industry by providing sustainable consumer-focused solutions." So they're talking again about the global market. they're another company that's focusing on where this industry is going to be in 10 to 15 years. I do like the idea that they're going to be aiming to put cannabinoids into everything from toothpaste to deodorant. And I do think that, especially from a CBD standpoint, CBG, CBN, and some of the other minor cannabinoids, that is going to be a reality within even the next 2 to 3 years. We've already talked and seen CBD is basically going into everything. I talked recently about Balance Company making their odorless, tasteless, completely invisible, clear, water soluble CBD extract line that's going to be going white label. Those types of innovations are going to have these products going into everything. There's a lot of companies investing in CBN, CBG products right now. And I do think that eventually there's going to be a removal of the stigma surrounding THC as, again, more and more people build up a tolerance and acceptance to this. THC builds up a tolerance insanely fast. So when we consider the comparison to alcohol, for instance, for most people, they're not building up an alcohol tolerance quite naturally, and alcoholism has a lot of downsides, whereas your THC tolerance builds almost immediately and it can be normalized in a very short period of time. So I do think that once cannabis becomes more and more mainstream, is more globally accepted, and people are used to these THC products, people aren't going to be looking at THC as the scary high drug that they do today, because they're all going to be used to it. And once everyone's used to it, then you're going to start seeing those products show up in everything as well. And I do think that that is sort of the long-term approach to when you're looking at the cannabis industry, is not anticipating it in joints and pre-rolls and dried flower, which is, sort of the level one of this industry, but seeing it in all the other products that you can use on a daily basis, whether it's deodorant, whether it's shaving cream, whether it's toothpaste, whether it's drinks, whether it's food, salves, lotions, the list goes on and on. And then again, products that will be even more innovative than those. But at least for Neptune Wellness, I do think that one of the things that's a difficult thing for launching the products that they briefly mentioned is the launch into BC, where they have to deal with the BC retail stores first before going private. This is a downside to the BC and Ontario system. And if you look at actual sales numbers, you can see that those BC and Ontario provincial stores are getting decimated by private retailers in about a 5-to-1 ratio of sales numbers. So unfortunately, I do think that over the long term, hopefully BC and Ontario stop being up their own ass and trying to have a monopoly on this industry, as they've done with the liquor distribution in the past, and start realizing that they should get their tax percentages of this, but them being part of the distribution and sales model is a detriment to the entire industry, as they're not doing a good job. The sales aren't going well received. They don't have their staff trained up to par. And realistically, a lot of the cannabis consumers don't really trust or want to go to government regulated stores, or government owned stores to buy their cannabis. It is more of a localized business idea. And obviously, the idea is to support the private industry a little bit better. So hopefully, within the next year, we've already seen some changes that have come through because of COVID, and I think that that will continue to progress. And by this time, maybe next year or the year later, hopefully BC and Ontario will have more of a private retail model, that allows these companies to benefit and also allows them to quit slowing down the advancement of their own industries, which is something they've massively done. Within BC, they have hindered their own cannabis industry aggressively, and same with Ontario. And this is why some sales numbers within those provinces with higher populations, and really BC especially, that was world renowned for cannabis pre-legalization, now looks pathetic in comparison to Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, which is a real stain on the sort of reputation of the province. So I do hope that that gets changed within the next years, and that would also allow a lot easier access for companies like a Neptune or any company that's bringing their products to market to then focus quickly on private retailers and have their products hit markets and focus on high sales volume areas versus having to go through the government stores first. Lastly, today, looking at Village Farms International, who announced that its wholly owned Canadian cannabis subsidiary, Pure Sun Farms, has entered into an agreement with Medical Cannabis by Shoppers, in which they will supply a range of branded, high-quality BC-grown cannabis products to be made available to the Medical Cannabis by Shoppers customers. And Shoppers is Canada's leading health, beauty, and convenience retailer, and its wholly owned subsidiary, Loblaw Companies Limited. Now supported by specially trained pharmacists, the Medical Cannabis by Shoppers online store is the largest national cannabis marketplace in Canada, and Pure Sun Farms expects selected dried flower products to be available for sale for the Medical Cannabis by Shoppers portal as early as the beginning of December of this year, and selected pre-roll, bottled oil, and vape products to be available in early 2021. And Pure Sun Farms 28-gram 1-ounce package offerings will be the first large format cannabis offering listed by Medical Cannabis by Shoppers. We're proud to partner with one of Canada's largest and most respected retailers to provide Canadian medical cannabis patients nationwide access to the same high-quality products that have made Pure Sunfarms one of the best-selling cannabis brands in our market, said Mandesh Dosanjh, President and Chief Executive Officer of Pure Sunfarms. This partnership lays the foundation for both companies to realize future opportunities as the retail and medical cannabis landscape evolves into Canada. So, obviously, recently I talked about Village Farms finally finishing the transaction with Pure Sun Farms, so now it's their wholly owned subsidiary. It was a joint venture in the past, and now that we've seen it go completely under the Village Farms umbrella, they've moved much more aggressively. So Pure Sun Farms has been doing a lot of big moves within the last couple of months, and I would expect them to continue to do so. Now also that they're entered into the medical cannabis by shoppers, I think they're going to dominate that market as aggressively as they have the dried flower market within BC and other provinces so far. Pretty much every province that Pure Sun Farms has went into, they've done a really good job of kind of overtaking the dried flower market and also doing a really good job of focusing on where there are missing pieces, basically, from the Canadian market. Within, like I said, the recreational market, they realized quite quickly that half ounce and 1 ounce formats were not available and that many consumers were looking for those. They quickly established themselves as that sort of provider, and they've been doing really, really well within that space. Now they're going to do the same thing for the medical market within Canada, and I would expect them to see the same success. And also, I do expect that that's going to be sort of the next big step to push that company forward into their next phases of development. Hopefully, through their medical partnerships, they're going to start focusing a little bit more on Cannabis 2.0 and 3.0 products. But I do think that that'll be sort of the final culmination of them being sort of the number one brand within Canada. If they're well established within the rec market and the medical market, they're going to be doing real well moving forward. And I would expect, again, to see more aggressive moves from Village Farms with Pure Sun Farms over the next 2 years, now that it is completely their wholly owned subsidiary. So, lastly today, as this is our 500th episode of InvestorIdeas.com podcasts, I've included my list of favorite interviews that we've had over the years, which I highly recommend going back and listening to if you're bored. So number one on the list is obviously Tommy Chong. Interviewing him was a pretty big personal career highlight for me, as his name has been synonymous with cannabis for decades, and he's not only been personally incarcerated for his involvement with the cannabis industry, but has also helped shape cannabis culture today. And I highly recommend going back and listening to that interview. One of the first interviews that we ever had was actually with Montel Williams. He was one of the first high-profile interviews on the podcast that we had, and certainly set the high bar for future interviews. And Montel was both generous with his time as a cannabis activist who has helped educate and better inform the public about the many benefits of cannabis, specifically around MS. One of the other interviews that I found very interesting was with Haven Life Sciences. This was with Tim Moore and Susan Chappelle, the co-CEOs of Haven Life Sciences, which was our first interview surrounding the psychedelic industry, and provided some great insights onto the future of the psilocybin research and how that industry is going to look. Very, very informative, and one that is quite lengthy, so I would recommend checking that out. Another one was with Shavo Adajian, who is a minor musician myself. It was a real pleasure getting to speak with Shavo from System of the Down about his cannabis lifestyle brand, as well as how cannabis has helped inspire him and influence his music career. Another one that was personal to me was with Chef Joe Sasto, as I've worked in the restaurant industry for about 10 years, and I found that his story, as well as what he's been doing with cannabis and culinary techniques from farm to table, going across North America and doing these little pop-up venues, has been extremely inspiring to both culinary artists as well as people within the cannabis industry. And I do think that a lot of his ideas are going to be what shapes the future of the sort of cannabis and restaurant culmination that will hopefully become a reality within the next couple of years. Another one was with Matt Markevich, the managing director of the Cannabis ETF. Matt has been on our podcast multiple times, and I highly recommend listening to the many interviews we've had with him. He's done a great job of really analyzing and giving you the bird's eye view of the cannabis industry, and has definitely been one of the most informative guests when it comes to market trends. And lastly, one of my other favorite interviews was with Duma Wenshu, the CEO of Province Brands. I've mentioned that company only a few times, still haven't gone public, but they're a company that I very much think is the next generation of what this industry can be. Duma is probably one of the most visionary CEOs that I've been able to talk to on the podcast. And his company and technology focused on brewing beer from hemp, I think will be one of the biggest industry game changers, as I do think that as a long-term sort of implication for the cannabis industry is going to be massive. I think that once you eventually have, right now, you're slowly seeing the decline of the liquor industry. There's many many documentaries coming out within the next year all about the dangers of alcoholism and the dangers of alcohol as a younger generation is raised with cannabis accessible to them. I do think that you're going to see alcohol start to go the way of cigarettes, as it's become a social stigma surrounding it that's much worse than what we see today. And I do think that the next phase for a lot of these brewmasters and people who are working in the craft beer industry is going to be having to go to a different alternative, which I do believe is going to be hemp. I do believe that you're going to see within the next 10 years or so. I think it's a ways out because the technology is difficult to implement and the regulations surrounding the industry make it difficult to bring these products to market. But once that all goes away, you're going to start seeing that the beer industry gets turned into this cannabis beer industry, which I think will be very, very cool. That's all for today's podcast. And obviously there was more I could list as far as interviews that I would highly recommend checking out. Again, all the links are attached within the article. But I would like to thank all the guests that we've had on and experts we've had on over the last couple of years that have helped us reach this 500th episode. That's all for today's podcast, and enjoy the rest of your day. That's all for today's podcast. Podcast is now a certified word trademark on the blockchain through Cognate Incorporated CM certification. InvestorIdeas.com podcasts are also available on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play Music, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and TuneIn. If you'd like to be a guest or sponsor of this podcast, please contact InvestorIdeas.com. Investor Ideas reminds all listeners to read our disclaimers and disclosures on the InvestorIdeas.com website, and this podcast is not an endorsement to buy products or services or securities. Investors are reminded that all investments involve risk and possible loss of investment. Investor Ideas does not condone the use of cannabis except where permissible by law. Our site does not possess, distribute, or sell cannabis products.